Welcome to the She Said Privacy, He Said Security podcast. Like any good marriage, we will debate, evaluate, and sometimes quarrel about how privacy and security impact business in the 21st century.
Hi, Jody Daniels here. I'm the founder and CEO of Red Clover Advisors, a certified women's privacy consultancy. I'm a privacy consultant and certified informational privacy professional, providing practical privacy advice to overwhelmed companies.
Hi, Justin Daniels here. I am passionate about helping companies solve complex cyber and privacy challenges during the life cycle of their business. I am the cyber quarterback helping clients design and implement cyber plans, as well as help them manage and recover from data breaches.
And this episode is brought to you by, I get a symbol of my head, Red Clover Advisors. We help companies to comply with data privacy laws and establish customer trust so that they can grow and nurture integrity. We work with companies in a variety of fields, including technology, e-commerce, and media and professional services. In short, we use data privacy to transform the way companies do business. Together, we're creating a future where there's greater trust between companies and consumers. To learn more and to grab our new book, Data Reimagined, Building Trust One Bite at a Time, go to redcloveradvisors.com. Well, today is a super fun day, but before we dive in to our amazing guest, do you have any idea what today is, Justin?
September 29th.
Yes. Do you have any idea what happened on September 29th?
So you're going to tell me.
I am. 20 years ago, we went out for our first date.
Wow, you really remember.
I do. I'm an elephant.
What did we do on our date?
We went to dinner at a restaurant that sadly is no longer here. And it was a very special restaurant because we went back for many celebrations, including that's where we got engaged. So now that we have that underway, we can switch gears because it's a happy day and it's fall. And we're going to chat marketing and privacy. So we have Yacov Salomon, who is a recognized authority in the fields of machine learning and AI, and a seasoned technology executive who has built industry-leading innovative technology and teams at startups, as well as Fortune 500 companies across multiple verticals. Before Ketch, where he is now, he was the VP of engineering at Salesforce, leading the AI and ML and analytics engineering group, and VP of data science at Crux, which was acquired by Salesforce. Yacov lectures on machine learning and AI at UC Berkeley and holds a PhD in mathematics from the University of Melbourne, Australia. We're so excited that you're here to join us today.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Absolutely.
So why don't we dive in and ask you how your career evolved to founding Ketch?
Great question. I have two answers to it. There is the external and the internal kind of reasons. External is circumstances. As you described, we got acquired. All the founders here were part of this startup called Crux, a data management platform operating in the marketing and ad tech space. I was leading the machine learning and AI efforts there. We got acquired by Salesforce in 2016, and I found myself running the machine learning, AI, and analytics functions, large portfolio of acquisitions and product that were built in Salesforce. And my CTO from Crux was running then the CTO of Marketing Cloud. And it was 2017. And the number one priority was to make Salesforce GDPR compliant. So we rolled sleeved and we went to work, and we've built something that the industry held as a gold standard for what to do with GDPR. But we all felt deep inside that, we weren't sure we've done a good job. We felt like we left the system a lot more brittle. It was costing a lot more to run in, AWS bills. We knew that if another regulation came around the corner, we will have to go back and do all the work again. So we all felt like there's got to be a better way to do it. And if we were to build a solution for our previous self technologies, what would it be and how we can make it simpler? So that's the external, the circumstances reason. The internal, I wanted to scratch personally, so to speak, in founding Ketch is coming off 2 decades of, I often term myself an accidental data scientist. And when I started, it wasn't a thing, but I happened to be at the right place at the right time to ride this wave. And I'm very fortunate for that. I think we've, as an industry, machine learning AI has grew phenomenally over the last 2 decades. We have cutting edge technology, cutting edge algorithm, but we're still delegated to solve the less important questions. And I often say that if somebody goes to the doctor and she orders them to go and do all these invasive procedures, they reveal all this sensitive information. We never think twice. We know that there is absolute value that we're going to attain from that information, and that's all that's going to be done with it. If my machine learning algorithm ever has the chance to deliver the same, it's clear to me that in many places, that level of trust need to exist. So my personal wish for what we're doing here at Ketch is to unleash data in trusted circles, enable this trust technology to be able to, for machine learning, intelligent systems and data to go and solve the real hard problems that we have.
Well, congratulations on the huge run that you had to lead up to Salesforce and the great work that you did there. You're absolutely right. People are always referring to Salesforce as the gold standard, oftentimes when they're looking at compliance. So part of what we're going to be talking about and where people get confused is ad tech. And I shared in our little pre-work and pre-call here that some people think ad tech is the hardest part of privacy to understand. So I was hoping that you might be able to, in our brief time here today, be able to share with our audience what makes ad tech so complex to understand. And then we'll kind of dive into how that ties to, privacy laws and regulations and GDPR.
Yeah, I think there are 3 things that make ad tech difficult. The first one is the complex ecosystem. The second one is what I term the identity problem. And the third one is the consent problem. So we can dive into each one of them. The ecosystem problem is, I think in most people's mind, you watch a sport event and an ad comes on, and for the consumer, there's really only these 2 parties involved: the context where the ad is displayed, the publisher as we call it usually, and then the brand, the ad, right? So the advertiser in this case. And it feels like this is only a 2-player game. The reality, of course, of the ad tech industry is that there is a plethora of systems and services and providers behind the scene to enable that interaction, right? And we've built that over many years, especially with the advent of programmatic advertising. There's the supply side platform and the demand side platform and the exchanges and the optimizers and so on and so on and so on. And it's amazing. And it's all geared around delivering the right message at the right place at the right time for the right person. So we've evolved there a lot. But that complex ecosystem creates a very complex data flow reality. I call it supply chains, where data flies around many, many, many hands and many, many systems, delivering value and producing some incremental intelligence everywhere it goes. But at the end of the day, it's hard to say, at any step of this big, data supply chain, who owns the data, where does it come from, what are the regulations that apply to all of it, and so on, so on, so on. So it's really that complex ecosystem that is the first problem. The second one is tied to that is the identity problem. I don't know how many folks are aware of it, but we all present ourselves in the internet through our browsers, through our mobile devices. We have getting attached all sorts of identities. There's ones that are attached to the browser and to the mobile device, but there's also ones that we attain by logging in places. We have our email, we have a username. And then there's other ways in which identity gets manifested in the form of cookies, first party or third party. And those identities are what marks the data anywhere it goes to be able to do the work. It's what we call the device graph. It's a complex, again, network of identities. And to be able to associate data from one place to another, you need to have a good understanding of that identity world. And that is very tough, especially now that third-party cookies going away, for example. And the third problem is this notion of consent. We think of consent, and I think we'll talk about it more, as giving permissions. And there is regulations that necessitate giving those permissions at a certain granularity. So for example, GDPR says, okay, you can't just say, do you agree or not agree on collecting my data? You have to be a lot more specific. What are you going to do with the data? Okay. So when it's just a company speaking to a consumer directly, they can be quite dynamic and flat like that. They'll say, okay, we're going to do these 5 things. Do you agree or not? When you go into an ad tech scenario, as well as just saying what you're going to do, there's this plethora of who's going to do it. And if you were to expose to an end consumer the full spectrum of optionalities, this provider can do these things and this provider can do these things, it would be a phone book, a long list of clicks that you have to do as far as permissioning, and no consumer would be able to make those decisions clearly. So it's very tough to strike the right balance with ad tech of how many permissioning levels you can afford a consumer at the end of the day, and how do you translate that to the rest of the system. So it's difficult. And I mean, there's tactical examples, like Kochava is a great example. There was the FTC versus Kochava. Kochava is a location service that exists on many mobile devices for many of us. It collects data in the background. And of course, you can cross-reference that information with things like real estate data, and then it becomes extremely problematic when it comes to Planned Parenthood and other issues that we have in the agenda now, and being able to identify users where they visited and for different purposes. So all of that manifests in real, all that complexity manifests itself in real world problems.
I really like how you summarize that into those 3 different buckets. I think that was super clear. So Justin, I think you're going to help us maybe dive into the consent piece a little bit.
Well, I guess I'm going to throw this to the 2 of you when I think about what we're talking about. And I'm going to bring up Sephora, something that Jody was talking about a little bit earlier this week in the Wall Street Journal. And so, Yacov, if I go to Sephora's website and I'm tooling around because I want to get my wife some goop or something, perfume, Sephora knows I'm there. And then is what really happened that caused them to get a fine is then Sephora says, we can take Justin's user information and sell it to Facebook, and then Facebook will then run an ad. So when Justin's on his Facebook feed, he'll get another ad for Sephora to go buy Jody something else. And the bottom line is, I never consented to Sephora selling my stuff to Facebook so they can throw me ads. From an ad tech perspective, is that what happened here, or can you help enlighten our audience?
Yeah, so the short answer is yes, that is what's happening there. And like I said again here, we've extended the example from you and Sephora now to another third party, in this case, Facebook. But I want the audience to understand that there's a lot of times a third, a fourth, a fifth, a sixth, a seventh even order. So it's everything I'm about to say just gets extremely magnified with the complexity of the ecosystem. But in a sense, yes. And these days it sounds ridiculous that we even talking about this as being something that should you or should you not afford the right. But we have to understand, and when we started down the track of marketing and ad tech, right, the idea was to really benefit the end consumer. Advertising was a mean, marketing was a mean by which we've paved the road of building the internet, right? I mean, like we've created all these services, and that's what companies used. And the idea behind there was to, how do we get you a better message? It's only now, after years of doing that we're woken up to the reality that there are negative externalities to it, which is, this idea that there are the invisible side of what happens to my data. And so at the very least, what regulations demand is that companies are being transparent about what happens. So if you think about GDPR, what from a technical perspective, I usually say what it introduced is what I call the permission layer. So no more just data running around free and going into systems and doing what it needs to do. But now going forward, we need, as well as all the pipelines that for where the data flies through, is we need pipelines for permissions. And so in that example, what happened with Sephora is a few things. That permission layer needs to do 3 things. Again, the first thing is it needs to collect those signals. It needs to ask users, what do you want to do? The second thing it needs to do is it needs to propagate that to all the other systems that hold the data, that collect, store, analyze the data. And the third thing it needs to do is it needs to make sure that those systems do the effect that is required based on the permission. So if you say, don't collect my data for this purpose, it really doesn't get collected. If you say, delete my data in the system, it really gets deleted, right? Where it became a little bit gray area is in point number 2 and 3. Sephora collected consent. I mean, I don't think that was the issue. But to the extent that it got propagated, there was, under the CCPA at least, and I'm not a lawyer, so you guys are a lot more experts in this field. But the way I interpret it, the CCPA was not as explicit about what does selling of data really means, and a lot of companies were in the had the opportunity to maybe interpret moving the data around to deliver more value to the consumer, presumably through better ads, as not really selling, but rather providing a service. Well, the Sephora ruling of the court says, no, that's not the case. Every time you move the data around, every time you include another third party that leverages the data to do some work, we will consider that under a sell, and therefore you need to apply all the required permissioning through all the different levels to that problem. Does that, I hope that moves.
Yeah, I was going to add in that part of it. So especially under CCPA and here in the US, one of the distinctions, and this is part of the challenge with how companies handle it, I don't have to collect consent to drop the different trackers that can be hundreds. So anyone listening, if you've ever tried to go to a recipe site, I think it's a great example, and it takes a long time to load. That's because that recipe site is free, giving you great free recipes, but it's being paid for by ads. And those ads are trying to be tailored to you through a long list of ad tech. But there's no requirement here to say, yes, it's okay to drop those trackers or pixels or tags or whatever flavor word people want to use. They're different, but synonymous in my little ecosystem. So here, I could go to Sephora or any other site in the US, and I could do my shopping, and then those pixels could still fire and they could share the information. The modern laws for those who have it, like in California, CCPA, and what we're moving towards for the other 4 states coming in 23, will let us say, no, I can opt out of those cookies. Now, in theory, we also have the Digital Advertising Alliance. It's been around for 10 years. That's supposed to say all sites are supposed to let me opt out of that. But it's complex, as we've been talking about.
I guess here's what I want to ask you, is me being kind of the audience today, is I handle data breaches. And so when I've come in, almost every time, the company doesn't know where their data is. Is it the kind that is going to require breach notification? And so what I'm trying to understand is, and I think, Yacov, you've been dealing with this, is on your second layer about the identity and how are companies, if they can't even figure out where their data is for breach notification purposes when a breach happens, which is worst case, how are they able to implement systems so they can track in this ecosystem you talk about, identity and consent, so that all of this is done? It just seems to me, from my perspective, that isn't happening, and it's just going to get worse because now we have all this other technology coming onto the scene, blockchain, autonomous vehicles, pick your flavor, where the data creation is at 10 or 100 times X what it's been prior to that.
Yep. No, you're absolutely correct. It is, and that's sometimes we talk about when we talk about the evolution of the market in terms of privacy, we talk about comply, control, and secure. And I think the first mental model shift that companies had to go through is this idea that privacy is important. And I think by and large, we've been beating this drum for 4 years now, coming up to 5. And I think a lot of the people have picked up already that, okay, privacy is not just a fad that is going to come and go. This is something that we're all going to have to start respecting. The dark side of privacy, as far as companies are concerned, is the fact that, yes, some of this flies straight in the face and against the grain of how we've been handling data up to this point. The advent of big data meant that we all collected first and asked questions later. It was this idea of cheap storage and cheap processing. So just collect as much as you can And the example of all these third-party JavaScript tags firing on the site, collecting all that information, shoving it over to third-party services to be used later on for something has been the model that we've been operating under. Absolutely. One of the things that any organization needs to do as it starts trying to grapple with how they're going to implement the notion of complying with privacy is to take control of the data they have. And so at Ketch, one of the first things we've built is this, what we call data discovery and classification, is the technology that goes into your systems, searches through the mountains of data you have, and picks the schema, as we call them, the main themes of your data, the structure in it, and where does sensitive data lives, so that you can start penning where are you going to go first, how are you going to apply it first, which system needs your attention. Absolutely. And a lot of companies are behind the 8 ball here. I mean, they're not yet in control of that. Definitely all the companies with a lot of legacy systems find it a lot more difficult because, we talk to financial institutions, they have terabyte of data that haven't been structured, that is just sitting, in flat files everywhere. And getting control of that will take time. So this is almost like the digital transformation required companies to change fundamentally how they operate. I think now we're in what I call trust transformation. That will be a big shift again in how we control data and how we understand the data we have.
Well, in part of that transformation, we have different regulations. I hinted, right? California doesn't require me to opt in first, but under GDPR, I do have to opt in first. And there's 150 privacy laws, all with their own flavor. So that's really challenging for companies to do. Can you talk a little bit about, what are the key problems you're seeing companies have and how you're helping those companies solve them?
Absolutely. And again, we have the hindsight now in 2022 that we didn't have in 2018. I remember even Mark Benioff at Salesforce was, okay, GDPR is out. We're just going to apply GDPR globally. This is going to be the standard. Let's not worry about this region versus that region. First kind of thought, first principle is maybe kind of makes sense. But when you think about it over time, you see a system that is evolving all the time. It's not that feasible, because if I'm a citizen of a certain country or a certain state or a certain region, and some other part of the world change the regulations, I don't want necessarily my services to change all of a sudden, right? If GDPR 2.0 comes out in a couple of years, and I'm in Texas, why do all of a sudden I need to do something different? So I think the reality is that as a humanity, as a society, we're going to keep evolving notions of what privacy is, and there's going to be a lot of experiments about what is the right set of regulation. Is it opt-in? Is it opt-out? Are there some situations that this holds, some situations that other holds? What are the regulations required? What are the limitations? This will keep evolving, and I suspect that everywhere is going to be a little bit different. I mean, even under GDPR, I know that countries like Israel have a different flavor of GDPR than, say, for example, countries like Germany. So there's not going to be the one size fits all, unfortunately, in this kind of world. So the reality is that what we need to do then is we need to make it easy for companies to apply global policies through what we call click, not code. How do we enable, like the TurboTax kind of scenario, how do we enable professionals, GCs and policy makers to go into a system and be able to, region by region, legislation by legislation, define the policies that the posture that a company wants to take with respect to the regulations in that particular jurisdiction. And that I think at the heart is where a lot of the technologies and the privacy enhancing technologies are kind of evolving. This ability to front this simple UI where professionals can define the regulations and change them in clicks, not code.
I like clicks, not code. I haven't heard that one. I like it. It's gonna be our next t-shirt.
Maybe we'll just be on the back of
what we could do? We have a lot of t-shirts that keep coming out of the show. We could have a list of here's all the t-shirts.
Right. So, Yacov, for a company starting their privacy program, what advice would you give them?
That's a great question. There's a lot of tactical advice that I can get to in a moment of what to do first and what to do second. But I wrote a piece a few years back, and I don't think it got a lot of attention then, but maybe it will with time, that says, don't worry about regulation. And what I meant by that then is that first, like all companies, the first thing you need to worry about is your customers, your users, and you need to connect with them and where they're at and what they want. And I think that if you do that right, almost always you're going to be on the right side of the fence as far as all of these things come to be. So in terms of how transparent you are about what you do with data, in terms of how much do you follow through on your statements of what you do and don't do with data, how much you're clear when things go wrong about acknowledging that something went wrong and you're going to change that. This all builds, we've seen that again and again and again, builds trust, builds brand, and so on and so on. So the first thing I will say is think about your consumers, think about your customers, and think about what they would prefer and how would they like you to deal with the data. The second thing I would say very importantly is, I don't know if you want to jump in with a question, but that
I was just going to say, maybe you should repost your prior post. It might now be relevant that people will be in a different frame of mind to consider what you're saying.
That's right. The second thing I would say is, remember that especially in 2022, you're not alone in the sense that, we've established quite a few by now patterns of how you can efficiently become compliant using technologies that are already out there available. You might still be, an organization might still contemplate, do we build or do we buy? But at the very least, there are templates, there's blueprints about, the set of technologies that you need to be compliant, okay? So if it's a consent management platform, if it's a right orchestration platform, if it's propagations of consent and signals, and so on, so on, so on. So we have the tools out there, and you can implement them. And the good news about these tools is that you can go ahead and implement them and worry about how you want regulation to affect you later. Because a lot of these tools, if they're done correctly, should not just apply for regulations today. You're not buying the GDPR solution or the CCPA solution. You're buying a technical solution that you integrate with your system that has to prove the test of time. As regulation changes, as policy changes, you're going to natively adopt because you have the configurations to do so. And once you have these two, once you thought about your customers and what they want, and you started implementing some of the capabilities to be compliant with your data stack, then you can come together and figure out what are the policies that matter for the company. As you apply those technologies that help you there, the first thing you'll do, as we discussed, is discover and classify your data. So you're going to start having a picture also of what your data is. And from there, we move forward.
Thank you for that.
I love when we put customers first and then we think about the regulations. And when you were saying we don't buy a GDPR or CCPA solution, that's exactly what so many companies have done. There was the GDPR, now I need another one. And when we have 4 new laws coming into play in 2023, we have this maybe national law here in the US. We do kind of like to ask our guests, for their crystal ball purview into the future. So what do you think is going to happen with privacy going forward? And for everyone listening, I really hope that you heard the idea, regardless of these different regulations, you have to build a fundamental base. And then any of these new laws that come will be much easier to be able to apply. But Yacov, what does your crystal ball say?
Yeah, I mean, and yeah, I do think I have a crystal ball, of course, like everybody, but I don't know if it's the right one. So I think we've already touched on one thing. I think from the layer of privacy that is to do with society is going to continue to evolve, both because more and more places are going to start contemplating what is the right laws and regulation, and they're going to have the benefit of regulations and laws that came before them and shortcoming of those. Current regulations are going to be updated. There's going to be GDPR 2.0. There's going to be a GDPR 3.0, and we'll keep going, I think. On the society kind of level, my hope is that very soon, and I wrote a piece about that as well, very soon we're going to move from what they call command and control regulations paradigm, right, where regulators come in and it's really about fines and defining the bad behavior. And we're going to move in more to an incentive-based kind of framework, right? Like we've done that with the environmental movement, where all of a sudden we created market incentives that made the industry rise up and come up with solutions. So I really want to see the privacy and trust world evolve beyond let's not get fined into how do we evolve the intricate of the conventions we have in society as around data, fiduciary relationship and circles of trust, and enable those on the internet to create all the scenarios, if I link back to the top, of how data is going to get used through intelligent systems. So I think in that world, incentives will come up in one way or another, and we're going to start building towards the upside. On the other side, I think from a technical perspective, I've mentioned already, we always saw that as a three-step kind of evolution: comply, control, and secure. I think the control is where the world is right now. Comply is kind of accepted. Now we're trying to figure out how to make it so. I think the next step is really about securing the data, and that's where cybersecurity going to meet privacy in many ways, right? Two sides of the same coin. And what I mean by that is we want to make sure that all these, we call them permits. Permits are the most fundamental object here, is the contract that is signed for every piece of data and every user and every use case. What can and can be done? How can they be applicable by default? That includes securing the data in many ways, how it goes through the system. And we already see a lot of techniques coming out of academia. They're getting implemented in various places, what I call modern cryptography, things like homomorphic encryption and differential privacy and multi-party computations, and zero-knowledge proofs, and so on. They're going to be some of the tools, some of the machineries that we're going to implement to really make permissions stick, and in the same time, let data do what data's day job is, which is to fuel intelligent systems and deliver value. So I see technically we're going to bring a lot more of that machinery into the fold under the privacy enhancing technology. And from a society perspective, I hope we move towards an incentive rather than a control kind of paradigm.
Well, I certainly agree on the incentive part. I think that's why we're starting to see privacy as a big part of ESG these days. And you were smirking over here with your privacy enhancing technologies.
He mentions cryptography.
And then you get all happy.
Fascinating topic for a variety of industry. But speaking of privacy and technology, do you have a tip that you'd like to offer as a best practice for friends when you're, at a cocktail party outside the eastern hills of Oakland?
For in the context of privacy, we've said that several times in this conversation, and I think you've pointed it out first, that it all begins with the data, and at the end of the day, understanding what data you have is the pivotal and most important foundational here. Whether you're a data scientist or you're an analyst or you're an engineer or you're a privacy lawyer, knowing and understanding what data you have is the key. So if you're do nothing else, finding a tool that helps you discover and classify the data you have is the best thing you could do to start moving forward.
Now, when you're not providing privacy tips and building privacy companies, what do you like to do for fun?
So I have two daughters, age 6 and 8, and the family really loves hanging out outdoors. In fact, last Wednesday, Thursday, we were in Yosemite with friends, and we're fortunate enough to make it to the top of Half Dome and back. That was an amazing trip. Highly recommended. Even if you don't make it all the way to the top, it's a beautiful, beautiful part of the world. But yeah, I'm looking forward this weekend. I'm going climbing with friends as well. So I try to. That's some of the joys of being in Northern California, is the access to beautiful national parks and fantastic outdoors.
Absolutely. Well, here in Atlanta, we'll just take our colorful leaves right now in the fall season. Well, Yacov, it's been a true pleasure to talk to you. If people want to connect and learn more about you and Ketch, where can they go?
So Ketch.com is our website. You can go there. You can find me on LinkedIn or on Twitter. And if you want to email me directly, then it's Yacov@Ketch.com. Very happy to strike a conversation or to pick up. I would also say there is one more project that I'm involved with in this space. It's called the Ethical Tech Project. And you can look that up as well, where we're trying to do, this is nonprofit, interdisciplinary kind of effort to try and advocate for some of these ethical data usage. We have some interesting work going on there, putting together a reference architecture. What does the privacy stack looks like? So if you want to get involved with that as well, try to find us there as well, ping us there.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to the She Said Privacy, He Said Security podcast. If you haven't already, be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes and check us out on LinkedIn. See you next time.